Welcome to the Real Estate Espresso Podcast, your morning shot of what's new in the world of real estate investing. I'm your host, Victor Menashe. On today's show, we're talking about a French term that is appearing often in contracts and insurance agreements. That term is force majeure. As of today's show, the World Health Organization has declared the novel coronavirus, that is COVID-19, a pandemic. States of emergency have been declared in multiple states and provinces all over the world. There's no doubt that COVID-19 has had and will continue to have adverse impact on the global economy. With disruption to supply chains, international travel, and business operations, a lot of individuals and businesses may be unable to fulfill their existing contractual obligations. So how might businesses look to their contracts for relief? On today's show, we're taking a deeper look at force majeure and whether it could, or perhaps already has, impacted you. Force majeure clauses are generally included in contracts to account for circumstances where a party cannot perform the contract due to circumstances beyond their control. A force majeure clause typically operates to absolve the non-performing party of any liability for its failure to meet the contractual obligations as a result of an extenuating circumstance. The precise effect will depend on the language or the provisions in each contract. Some contracts treat force majeure as an act of God. These events would then trigger the operation of that contract's clause. There's very little jurisprudence on what constitutes an act of God. Common cases include hurricanes and earthquakes. So the question is whether COVID-19 would meet that definition. Some contracts spell out a laundry list of events that fall within the scope of circumstances beyond the control of the parties, such as acts of terrorism, war, labor disputes, strikes, or adverse weather conditions. However, given the current state of affairs, it's likely that a court will find COVID-19 as an unforeseeable event outside the control of either party. Whether COVID-19 makes it impossible for a party to fulfill their contractual obligations is a different matter. The obligations cannot simply be more difficult. They have to be impossible. The determination of these questions will both be fact and contract specific. One of the most common contracts that developers and investors use is the AIA 101. These contracts are industry standard contracts that are widely accepted and used by many general contractors. The AIA 101 has a second document called the AIA 201. This document contains the general conditions that apply to 101. The AIA 201 has a clause under Section 8.3 which deals with the topic of delays. And this section deals with a lengthy list of the usual causes like labor disputes, fire, adverse weather, and so on. And if none of those possible causes have triggered an allowable delay, then there's a fifth item, and it says, and I quote, by other reasonable causes that the contractor asserts and the architect determines justify the delay, then the contract time shall be extended for such reasonable time as the architect may determine. It then goes on to say that claims relating to time shall be made in accordance with provisions of Article 15, which is the section that deals with dispute resolution. And under Section 15, all the contractor needs to do is provide notice of the delay. So this is an example of a contract that has a force majeure clause. The one place I expected to find a force majeure clause was in the standard agreements of purchase and sale. And after review of several states and provinces, I was not able to find a single force majeure clause in any of the standard contracts. This has given rise to what many realtors are now calling a COVID clause. For new contracts that are being written in the current environment, many buyers are including a provision that would allow them not to close if COVID-19 conditions make it impossible to close. And the wording I've seen for one such clause was extremely broad. It basically said that if the buyer didn't want to close, they could blame it on the virus and be off the hook. Of course, the entire industry is completely in uncharted waters, and the notion of a global pandemic being used to invalidate a contract has not really been tested in the courts. A review of the loan documents from several lenders showed an inconsistent treatment of force majeure. One contract that I reviewed listed the usual strikes, labor disputes, acts of God, and they didn't include any illness, disease, or pandemic as one of the acts of God, and then goes on to say that in no event shall an occurrence of force majeure extend any deadline or requirement by more than 60 days in the aggregate. And as you know, we are well into a 60-day delay because of COVID-19. So if you have a contract that you're negotiating, or perhaps a contract that you've already signed, I recommend that you go and read the force majeure language that's in it. Have an awesome rest of your day. Go make some great things happen. I'll talk to you again tomorrow.